All right, folks, so we're going to start with a pre-programming here.
I'm John Hildebrand, Regents Professor Emeritus of Neuroscience at the University of Arizona and the International Secretary of the National Academy of Sciences. And I'm grateful to my good friend Walter Leal for inviting me to make a few comments here in this grand occasion. When I was a graduate student in the mid-1960s at the Rockefeller Institute, later to become the Rockefeller University, I got to know a remarkable professor and the people in his group. The professor was named Dilworth Wayne Woolley. He was an eminent biochemist who had worked in the early days of identifying with B vitamins when he was a graduate student, and who went on to have many interests in biochemistry as related to brain function and other then novel ways of thinking about biochemical significance. But what was so important about Woolley to me was his personal dedication in the face of great adversity. When he was a graduate student, he gradually lost his sight owing to progressive diabetic retinopathies, so that by the time he finished his PhD, he was unable to see anything. Yet he finished his PhD. He went on to have a very important career as an investigator at the Rockefeller Institute and became a professor. And he put together a remarkable group that included Bruce Merrifield, the eminent person who went on to win a Nobel Prize for inventing solid phase peptide synthesis. What many people don't know is that Woolley had played a decisive role in planting the idea for that and supporting the work. It's just one example of what he did. But what I want to mention here is a couple things about the way Woolley worked as a professor, as an investigator, as an experimental scientist. He actually did experiments with his own hands when he was unable to see. I remember walking into his lab and seeing him sitting at a lab bench with a technician sitting next to him, both of them in their lab coats. Woolley being told as he handled things in the lab and mixed things, I mean, I don't remember the details, but he was told by the technician what things looked like. She handed him implements that he needed the way a scrub nurse would hand implements to a surgeon. It was a remarkable thing to see. This man was so dedicated to experimentation that he wanted to keep doing it himself, and he did. Meanwhile, he put together this remarkable group that did all kinds of important work, mainly in the field of peptide synthesis, and as I said, ultimately resulting in the remarkable breakthrough of invention of solid phase peptide synthesis. When I had the privilege of hearing Woolley give a lecture in a course, he did an act, I would call it an act, that was truly virtuosic. He got up in front of the class with chalk, pieces of chalk, white, yellow, red, between his fingers, so that he knew where the different colors of chalk were in his left hand. And with his right hand, he wrote on the blackboard, selecting the chalk that he wanted to use from his other hand. And he managed to write a whole sequence of biochemical reactions in a biosynthetic pathway, tracing a labeled carbon atom through the pathway by selecting the appropriate chalk and using his non-writing, his left hand, as a kind of template to form the characters on the blackboard. This was an extraordinarily amazing thing to see, that he was able to use the blackboard better than I could, even though he couldn't see what he was writing. This and the fact that he did experiments himself taught me a very fundamental lesson, much more important than what I learned in my scientific training, and that is the importance of dedication, perseverance, passion, and indefatigability. He would not yield at all to his lack of sight. Woolley was a remarkable character, and I wish everyone would know about him. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about him, Walter.
Okay. Very good. And that's how you wrote your book,
That's correct.
and
Yep.
all your manuscripts and
Yep.
everything.
Yep. And then what I do is then I type them in a regular typewriter, and then it's scanned into a computer,
Okay.
and then somebody can actually make all the corrections that are necessary in fixing my errors, which are often numerous.
You have a lot of drawers in here
Um,
behind you. And
Those are all my research collection. Mollusks. All these things.
how do you know the exact location they are?
Pardon?
How do you know the exact location?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So this is really a museum-grade research collection. That most of it I've collected myself. Some of it not, but most of it is. And the big cabinets have fossils. These are mostly recent things. So you see they're in these boxes, nicely curated, labeled in Braille. And recently I've also copied all my Braille labels so that eventually when it goes to a museum, they will have ready access to what's here. And that is my research collection from which I gain much of my inspiration. It's not the only thing I use, but it is the beginning of most of what I've done. And, you know, I love handling beautiful objects, most of which these are. And that's just great aesthetic pleasure, you know, which aesthetics is so important to me in what I do. And so, from childhood I've loved shells, from childhood I've loved natural history, and that's been my life.
You have also lots of files behind you. So are those the
Those are
manuscripts?
all things I've read.
Yeah.
Also behind you there, there's a whole wall of all the things I've read. So when I read papers, I take Braille notes, and they accumulate, and so I've read probably close to 30,000 books and papers over the years, which is one reason why my papers have large, heavy citations, you know, lots of bibliographic stuff in many languages, by the way, including Portuguese. And I love reading. I read every day scientific papers, which is one reason I can write about a whole large variety of subjects. Everything from human uniqueness to extinction to biomineralization, you know, to molluscan taxonomy and so forth.
You read a lot, but you could read more if they were available in Braille, right?
No, you know, people read to me, so I mean, Braille would help marginally, but it wouldn't be enough. Actually, it's much more convenient to have somebody read me papers, because then I can ask them, you know, skip this, or what's that reference, or, you know, I need an abstract, I need a discussion, but I don't need the whole thing, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, like everyone else.
Like everyone else,
Yeah,
exactly,
yes.
exactly right.
Sometimes we need to read the whole paper, but
Yep.
sometimes just a little bit here and
Yeah,
there
that's right.
would
That's
give the
exactly
message.
right. And so it's become, you know, a daily routine, which I really enjoy.
What else do you enjoy when you have free time?
Classical music. My wife and I are big fans of Baroque music. We actually sponsor the Sunday Baroque on KXBR, Cap Radio, and we listen to a lot of classical music in general. And just we enjoy reading the New York Times together. My wife reads that, and oh yeah, that fills up the day really.
What about traveling? Not during the COVID time, but before that.
Oh, we did an enormous amount of traveling. We've been all over the world, all connected with professional stuff one way or another, but you know, inevitably you get to see beautiful, wonderful places. And since I have family in Holland, and also professional connections in Holland, we go fairly frequently. I still read, write, and speak Dutch fluently. I've actually written articles in Dutch and done Dutch interviews and so on. So we've done lots and lots of work in the tropics, Panama, Guam, you know, all over South America, Africa, the Pacific Islands, you know, and so on. And even in the colder areas, I love the tropics myself, but I've even been to the Aleutian Islands, for example, southern New Zealand, southern Chile. So all over the place, lots of natural history experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for making the time today.
Oh, absolutely.
It was such a
Glad
great
to-
pleasure to
glad
meet
to
you
do it.
finally.
Yeah, and thank you for doing this all together. I mean, I think it's a great project.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We are going to be starting now officially the program. Thank you, everyone, for attending in person and remotely this winter celebration for the new members of the UC Davis Emeriti. This distinguished lecture series is a way for us to show appreciation to the movers and shakers who made the UC Davis campus what it is today. I hope you enjoy today's program. For those attending in person, the program can be accessed with a QR code on the back of your name tag. Using the same QR code, you may leave a message at the end of the event or provide comments regarding to this celebration. And if you don't have access, I have a few printed programs, the old style, but you can also get the program from the QR code. The same QR code will be shared shortly with those attending via Zoom so that they also have the program available to them. This program is going to be a combination of videos and the live presentations. And obviously, the distinguished lecture by Professor Geerat Vermeij. That's the highlight of today's event. And also we're going to have a poem recital by Andy Jones, who is coming very shortly, running from class to coming here. After the close of the program, we will have some social gathering and an open mic. And I invite everyone that was not in the video yet to come over here and share a few thoughts and send the best wishes for the new members of the Emeriti. As I mentioned in the video before, the members of the new members of the Emeriti, sometimes it's very hard to distinguish that they change. It's a matter of paycheck. They don't get the paycheck from the system going from the savings. But because this Emeriti, they keep coming to campus every day, like the distinguished Professor Geerat Vermeij. He's here on campus every single day. And every time I can contact him, he says, come at 8 o'clock and they can meet here. So the Emeriti never leaves. This is part of the UC Davis DNA. So the Emeriti gets engaged and is lively. I don't like that definition of the active faculty versus the Emeriti, because the Emeriti is as active as most faculty. So let's get started with the program. So like I said, it's going to be a combination of the videos and the live presentation. I'll start with the videos here. We have also 132 participants on Zoom at this moment. And let's start with the segment one of the program.
We should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes. Kashildahi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal D. Wintun Nation, and Yocha D. Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected, as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. Please scan to access the full program.
Please scan to access the full program. My name is Bill Lacy. I am joining your ranks as well, and I want to congratulate you on becoming an emeritus faculty member at UC Davis. My name is Bill Lacy. I was the former vice provost for university outreach and international programs for 15 years, and then a professor in the Department of Human Ecology and an interim department chair for a couple of those years. You're entering some very exciting times. So I've discovered I've continued to do much of the work I did before. I am writing papers on international partnerships, on issues of democracy and local food systems and citizen science. Doing some reviewing for the Fulbright program, which is near and dear to my heart. I am serving on some of my professional society committees on awards and strategic planning. So I encourage you to continue to be actively involved as an emeritus faculty member. There are so many opportunities and you bring so many skills and talents to that opportunity. So once again, welcome to the community of distinguished and exceptional UC Davis faculty retirees. Walter has asked me what are some of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of. And we have built such a strong international community here at Davis. When I began, we had 3 of our faculty members teaching overseas, in a couple in Western Europe and a South Fujimoto in Japan. When I stepped down from that role, we had over 50 of our faculty teaching every year in various locations on all 6 continents, and extending that opportunity for our students. I'm a firm believer that we take the best and brightest students and give them an incomplete education if we don't give them an educational opportunity overseas. So that's one of the areas I'm very proud of. Secondly, we stimulated many more research opportunities. We established a seed grant program, funded many exciting projects and proposals that generated actually $35 to $40 million in additional support from our modest seed grant program. So that's another. Thirdly, we highlighted so many of the accomplishments of our faculty and our staff internationally through our newsletter. And we did the same with the outreach and engagement activities, which are equally critical and important. How do we actually take our knowledge and put it to work in communities? And the outreach effort through the outreach and scholarly engagement in our communities, both locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally, are just a few of the highlights that I'm most proud of. In terms of thinking about what junior faculty should be thinking about in their careers, I would encourage them certainly to maintain their excellence in their own scholarship and to actively pursue their tenure process. But do not forget the opportunities that you have to take the knowledge that you're generating, to work collaboratively with colleagues, both locally and nationally and internationally, and to apply that knowledge where it makes most sense. There are so many needs and opportunities, and we have so much to give that I would encourage you to seriously consider that as you balance both your scholarship, these outreach activities that I'm suggesting you get involved in, and your personal life.
Please scan to access the full program.
Hi, I'm Nate Kuppermann. I'm a professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics here at UC Davis, and I serve as the chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce and chat with Professor Robin Hansen. Dr. Hansen is a newly retired professor of pediatrics, and she's been really one of the anchors of the Department of Pediatrics for many decades. She's been a faculty member at UC Davis since 1985, and she was one of the founding faculty members of the UC Davis Mind Institute, which stands for Medical Investigation of Neurodevelopmental Disorders Institute. And she's also was the founding director of the Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Dr. Hansen also started the Developmental Pediatrics Fellowship Program, which is funded by the Health Resource Service Administration and the Maternal Child Health Bureau. So with that, Robin, I'm just going to call you by your first name as we're good
Thank
friends.
you.
Why don't you just sort of reflect on first arriving at Davis almost 40 years ago and some highlights of your career?
Well, when I arrived as faculty, it was hardly felt like coming home because I had been at UC Davis as a medical student, and many of my favorite faculty, not only in pediatrics, but in other departments, were still actively teaching and providing clinical care. So I felt like I was coming back to a family that had been very supportive of me as a medical student. And so joining the faculty really felt like I was coming back to friends and sort of back to family. I came as the first and only developmental behavioral pediatrician, and there are relatively few of us still. I hate to say that, across the world and in our country, but I think really, as I reflect back on what was most important to me during my tenure as faculty and still is, and what helped me to be successful, was the spirit of collaboration and kind of the willingness to listen and be part of a vision that came, where people came together with different skill sets and different backgrounds and built something together. And not only faculty across different subspecialties of pediatrics, but across departments and even across the Causeway, and people on the main campus came together to work together to meet with families and really listen to a vision that has come to fruition at the Mind Institute. So it really started as 5 fathers of parents. They're then fathers. The fathers were the first ones to come forward, but really families who had children with autism, who were absolutely, determined that UC Davis needed to be a center for not only clinical care, but understanding not only autism, but other neurodevelopmental disorders in a way that reflected collaboration between researchers and clinicians who were providing care, and also with families as partners. And I think that's really what's made my career the most satisfying and successful, as well as the centers that I helped to grow at Davis, the Mind Institute and the Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, really wouldn't have happened without collaboration. So I guess really the ultimate, most important thing to me when I think back on my career is how many people were part of my professional life, and how important collaboration really is to be successful in science these days. And probably that's true across many, many fields.
I hope you remember this, but when my wife, Nicole Glazer, and I arrived here, it was a decade after you, it was 1995. You were really one of the welcoming, mentally friendly faculty members that help us adjust and learn about the department. And we're forever grateful for that.
Oh, thank you.
Had to say that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Chiu. I'm a professor and vice chair of entomology and nematology. Here today we have Dr. Sharon Lawler. She has been my colleague since I first started here in Davis. I hear Sharon has officially retired January 1st. So I would like to ask her perhaps one of her favorite memories that as a faculty here at Davis.
Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, so since this video is being shot in honor of our newly emeritus colleague, Geerat Vermeij, I thought I would talk about the role of Emeriti when I first came to UC Davis. Of course, Gary is continuing to contribute through this seminar, and I'm sure he will in other ways. He's a brilliant evolutionary ecologist, which has raised the tone of the place, and then of course he does terrible puns, which sort of lower the tone again, but I love Gary's puns. But anyway, when I was a new junior professor, I really benefited from Emeriti, who just spontaneously reached out to me. There was Bob Washino, a former chair of the department, and he gave me all sorts of equipment and advice He shared his network with me, and also he contributed his staff research associate, the wonderful Debbie Dritz, who was a great benefit to the program. So shout out to Bob. Mel Green would come by my office regularly with really fun readings from the scientific literature. Although I'm an entomologist, I also do some work on amphibians. He always brought me these great papers on frogs. And then, of course, there's the wonderful Tim Prout, who is a hoot and a half, and he used to prank our chair, then Rob Page, in various ways. And so the Emeriti play many, many roles on this campus. And as a junior professor, I really benefited from that, and so I'm so glad that we are having this event in honor of the new Emeriti.
Great. Yeah. So thank you, Sharon. I mean, you have helped me a lot as well. So when I first started, so I think you're my faculty mentor. So yeah. So congratulations, Gary. Thank you for everything they've done for UC Davis and what you will continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please scan to access the full program.
Hello, Dr. Vermeij. This is Suad Joseph. I'm an emeritus faculty from Anthropology and Women and Gender Studies and currently the Vice President of the UC Davis Emeriti Association. Congratulations on your retirement. I am thrilled to welcome you into the family of UC Davis Emeriti and to invite you to learn about and hopefully join the UC Davis Emeriti Association, which continues to support faculty in their retirement to an ongoing research and other kinds of activities such as brain food talks and visiting scholars and awards that we offer to Emeriti for various activities that they may undertake. So congratulations to you, Dr. Vermeij, and congratulations to all of the Emeriti who are joining our family of UC Davis Emeriti this year. Congratulations again and welcome to the Emeriti family of UC Davis.
Hi, this is Hermine Vermeij, and I'm Gary's daughter. One memory that I can share is when we were on a collecting trip to Mexico when I was maybe in 6th grade or so. We were looking at things in the intertidal, and I found a snail that was eating, I think it was eating a mussel, and I alerted my dad, and he said, "Oh, those aren't supposed to be eating mussels. They're only supposed to eat barnacles." He said, "You've made a discovery. We'll need to publish this." And then later on, he actually did make me a co-author on the paper about the diet of the snail, and how it should also include mussels and not just barnacles. And that was kind of a thrill for an elementary school kid to become a co-author on a very niche scientific paper. I probably saw a side of Gary that other people don't see, since I grew up in the house with him, and he really, really enjoyed playing cars with me when I was very little. So we would get our little Matchbox cars, and some that had a bit of a motor, and we would race them into each other as hard as we could. Like, he would sit on one side of the room and I would sit on the other side of the room, and we would, vroom, 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 rush the cars into each other. And then if they did collide, we would get really excited because we had caused a big crash. So that was one way that we really enjoyed playing together when I was little. Now that I'm older, we play a lot of Scrabble. And whenever I come to visit, we play games and games of Scrabble. And see, now he doesn't always beat me. Now I think I might beat him more than he beats me. So maybe he'll be afraid to play with me next time. But and he plays with my kids too. He plays with my 13-year-old son, and they also enjoy playing Scrabble with him. So he's a wonderful, wonderful dad, wonderful grandfather. Very happy to be celebrating him today.
Okay, I'm Bruce Gates. I'm an emeritus from the Department of Chemical Engineering, and I'll give you a brief academic history prefaced by a statement from my daughter, which she recognized many years ago, that I had a dull childhood. So I grew up in the Bay Area, kind of a middle-class family, comfortable, but I guess you would say not more than comfortable. Went to public schools, took the bus to the University of California, Berkeley, because it was a good education and it cost next to nothing. In my first semester, it cost me $55. And so I did a chemical engineering degree, took 4 years. I went to grad school at University of Washington. I had a great time in Seattle for 5 years. I went to Munich and did a postdoc as a Fulbright for a year, met my wife, came back, got a real job. It only lasted for less than 2 years. I worked for Chevron in Richmond, and I learned a lot about some real engineering practice and realized I wanted to be an academic. So I went off to the east to University of Delaware, which is a very strong chemical engineering department and history. It's right in the kind of the center of a lot of R&D and chemical engineering, and lots of people in the nearby industry helped me a lot along the way. So I stayed in Delaware till 1992, then came back to California to UC Davis. And the rest is history. And I've become an emeritus as of July 1st, 2022, and have enjoyed everything along the way. So Walter's asking me, what good memories do I have of UC Davis? And the answer I'd have is just a smear of good memories of interacting with people in a very positive and enjoyable way. And that runs from students to faculty colleagues to everybody else at the university. It's just been a very pleasant, enjoyable, congenial kind of existence for me. And I cannot think of a better environment to have been part of for that part of my career. So Walter's asking this hypothetical question: if I could reboot my career, what might I be doing differently? And the answer is nothing at all. I've been so fortunate doing what I've done. But I might just point out a couple of key things. I began my academic career at University of Delaware, which is not a very strong university, but which has an extremely strong chemical engineering department with a great history, very high ranking, tremendous connections with people in the industry. And I learned enormously from those folks and from that environment. And it helped me greatly to begin at that location in the East. And that set me up, I think, to do well and to enjoy life and get some good things done at UC Davis. But if I had reversed the pattern, it would not have worked well at all, because the training, the education, the help I got at University of Delaware, where I started, was really the whole key to things working out very well for my career. So that may sound like it's not a lot of praise for Davis, but actually it is a lot of praise for Delaware. Got me set up to be flourishing and benefiting from all the good things at Davis. So Walter is asking, is there anything else I want to add? And there sure is, because I've been blessed with my colleagues in chemical engineering department at Davis, and bless them for their wisdom. They've recently, that is in the last, 4 years, 5 years maybe, hired 3 faculty in my field, catalysis. And so I have the benefit of interacting with those younger folks and helping me stay engaged and stay, kind of intellectually involved, and I hope alert, benefiting greatly from them, and I hope helping them, because I've got a lot of experience, and I think they're still young and naive enough to listen to me, at least sometimes. So I'm benefiting greatly from the path forward within my department.
Please scan to access the full program.
Hi, my name is Banayad, and I am a graduate student in the biophysics department.
Hello, my name is Bianca Vargas and I'm a UC Davis undergrad in biochemistry and molecular biology.
Hello, my name is Antoinette Lim. I am a student in Dr. Leal's Biz 102 class.
We are honored to have been invited by Dr. Leal to introduce today's speaker, Distinguished Professor Emeritus Geerat Vermeij.
Born in the Netherlands, Dr. Vermeij immigrated to New Jersey as a child. He graduated summa cum laude from Princeton University in 1968 and received his PhD in biology from Yale University in 1971.
Soon after graduation, he joined the faculty at the University of Maryland, first as an instructor, then as assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor, a position he held from 1980 to 1988.
Professor Vermeij joined the UC Davis faculty in 1989 when UC Davis tuition was $1,531, and the campus led the nation in the number of PhDs awarded in the biological sciences.
Among his many accolades, Dr. Vermeij received a MacArthur Fellowship in 1992 and the Daniel Geerat Elliott Medal from the National Academy of Sciences in 2000.
In 2004, Dr. Vermeij received one of the highest honors bestowed on the UC Davis faculty, the UC Davis Academic Senate Faculty Research Lecture.
Dr. Vermeij is a fellow of the California Academy of Sciences. He served as a member of the Academy's Board of Trustees and received the Academy's Fellows Medal.
In 2021 and 2022, Dr. Vermeij was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Sciences.
Dr. Vermeij is an evolutionary biologist and paleontologist who studies fossils and living mollusks. He published more than 255 scientific papers and 6 books.
The topic of today's lecture is the evolution of power, which is also the title of an upcoming book by Dr. Vermeij.
His new book promises to take readers on a breathtaking journey across history and the natural world.
We shall have today a preview of Dr. Vermeij's argument that we can find solutions to the many problems arising from the extreme concentration of power by broadening our exclusively human-centered perspective.
Without much further ado, please join us in welcoming to the podium one of the most inspirational members of the UC Davis faculty, Distinguished Professor Emeritus Geerat Vermeij.
Well, first of all, let me thank you all for being here. Thank you for a wonderful intellectual environment. And before I proceed, I must acknowledge that whatever I may have done has been enormously influenced by many, many people, most especially Edith. She has been a wonderful intellectual, as in every other way fine companion for more than 50 years, and I am eternally grateful to her, as well as to the many people who have read to me, who have published with me, who have worked with me, our students, and so on. It is, no one does anything all by themselves. It is important to acknowledge that we all benefit from interactions with others of like mind and sometimes of unlike mind, and I am very grateful for all of that. So thank you. And it was wonderful to hear Hermine. For me, science begins with beauty. This is a snail, Lambus Linnaeus 1758 from Leal. It's a beautiful object. And when I began to collect shells as a boy, I was impressed with the beauty and the contrasting textures and shapes that shells had. But I soon learned that shells were parts of animals, that they belong to animals that have to make a living in the world, and that world is full of challenges, full of the kinds of challenges that are at the fundamental base of adaptive evolution. And so, in addition to continuing to find what I work on as beautiful, my work has been, if you will, powered by questions. How does it work? How does it develop? How does it evolve? Those have been the animating questions throughout my life, and they continue to do so. As part of the aesthetic of shells, I appreciated specimens that were in some ways perfect, unblemished, undamaged. But an experience on the windward side of Guam with a now departed friend, Lou Eldridge, persuaded me that that was a wrong way of looking at shells. Lou, on our sojourn out to the Algal Ridge, picked up a shell, a beautifully smooth cowrie with much of the top of it missing. And he said, our crabs in the aquarium do this. And that particular observation led me to find broken shells and repaired shells of profound importance and interest. And it opened an entire world to me, because I came to realize on that trip in 1970, on this most beautiful beach, that organisms have enemies, and enemies have consequences. Moreover, I had been fortunate to have had some collecting experience in the Caribbean, in Curacao and in Jamaica, and in Hawaii, and then in Guam. And what impressed me enormously from even those very first few visits was the enormous interoceanic difference in defense that the shells on the intertidal zone showed. In particular, the ones in the Western Pacific, and as it turns out, the Indian Ocean, are much more heavily armored, as exemplified by the Lambus, than the ones in the Caribbean. And those, in turn, were much more heavily armored than most of the shells we might find along the California coast or in other temperate and even polar oceans. To say nothing of fresh water where things are really bad. That, of course, led to the question, what is going on here? What distinguishes the Pacific and Indian Ocean from the Caribbean, and why should the tropics have greater defense than the temperate zones? And that got us, and I say us because Edith began to work with me closely on these projects, to the idea that in this particular case, shell-crushing predators with claws or strong jaws were capable of breaking shells, but also incapable of breaking others. And that's the key point, because if you're going to evolve a defense, you have to live through an attack successfully. And that, in turn, led to the whole idea that many aspects of locomotion, of defense, other behaviors are the consequence of strong, relentless selection due to predators. And this goes all the way down the line. And of course, having some background in fossils, it dawned on me that if you go back to the Paleozoic, that is to say, the time from 542 or so to 250 million years ago, you just don't see the kind of defense in shells, whether they're molluscan or brachiopod or whatever, as you do later in the geological record. And that led to the whole idea that there was a sort of an escalatory process that we could identify in almost every case, not just in mollusks, but in plants, in fish, and in just about every other form of life imaginable. And that much of this is driven by enemies. So enemy-driven or enemy-selected escalation proved to be a nice unifying idea. Now, of course, organisms, as evolutionary biologists are only too happy to tell you, respond to selection by enemies and potentially also by allies. But they do something else that is perhaps at least as important. They have agency. They create and modify their own environment. They have behavior. Even fungi, even plants have behavior. They do things, they modify the world that they inhabit. That is extremely important. Activity requires energy and resources. Energy and resources are sort of interchangeable, at least if Einstein is right. They also require time. Organisms require time. Activity implies time. And what is energy and time? It's power. Or as I put in my book, what is power? Where, as you may know, power is measured in watts. So, greater power confers greater competitiveness, greater influence over others. You know, where do you live? How do you live? It also provides a certain degree of freedom of action and an elimination of constraint. It can be individual, it can be collective. And the collective power, as it turns out, is enormously important because it illustrates the great importance of cooperation and working together, as we humans do, and of course we'll come back to that. Power has a lot of dimensions, which means that in order to gain more power, there's a lot of ways of doing it. You can get bigger. You can cooperate with more individuals. You can exert greater force. You can move faster or with greater agility, so locomotor performance. Distance traveled, a distance of detection, communication among individuals, and at the ecological level, productivity, the amount of biomass that a community or an ecosystem produces and that is usable by consumers. All of these are different but important manifestations of power. That is to say, the rate at which energy or resources are used or produced. So, with that in mind, I wondered if the whole idea of greater power could be generalized into a sort of a unifying pattern. So I got interested in the whole process of history. Now, most people, when they talk about history, of course, will think of human history, and that is not incorrect. Most human historians, that is to say, people who study humans, we're all human historians, most of these historians are interested in the details. So am I. And it has become sort of unfashionable to think about larger phenomena. There's also been a pervasive, decades-long argument, perhaps made most famous by people like Stephen Jay Gould, whom I knew very well, long before he died, that history as a whole has no direction, it has no structure other than one damn thing after another. In other words, everything is contingent on what happened before. Everything is contingent or dependent on particulars that have no predictive significance at all. This has been the dominant view among many philosophers and among historians. And I have to say, at one level, they're absolutely correct. We cannot predict who is going to do what and when. But when we step back, we can, I think, identify a general increase in power. And that increase is understandable even in terms of the biological processes that power life. So, I gave you a quick list of the advantages of greater power. Not everyone is going to benefit from those. In fact, probably, as in human society, very few people, very few organisms will be at the top of the heap. Nevertheless, even at the lower levels, it becomes an advantage to have as much power as the constraints on your life permit. And this is important. In other words, almost all organisms, most of the time, are going to be exposed to strong selection in favor of as much agency as those organisms have. Subject to constraints. Constraints such as, what is your evolutionary background? How much are you going to be influenced by where your enemies are? If your enemies and you overlap, you might not want to do that, so you're going to be constrained, and so on. In other words, except for the occasional massive disruption, in human cases, war, or in the case of the history of life, things like mass extinctions, in which case the powerful are actually the most vulnerable. But in almost all other times, which would be 96 or 97% of time, greater power provides an advantage to nearly everybody. So my hypothesis is that power increased over time. And as I say, there are lots of dimensions: body size, numbers, force, locomotion, and so on. I don't want to spend this time going through all the evidence, because there's a lot of it, and there's a lot of organisms to worry about, and there's also a lot of time. But I do want to talk about three interesting potential exceptions, which, to my mind at least, prove the rule. The first, if we think that maximum body size has increased generally over time, we would be correct if we talked about the ocean, but would be wrong if we talked about the land. The land, animals on land, at least, plants on land may still be bigger today than ever before, but animals on land were certainly bigger during the Cretaceous period in the form of giant dinosaurs, most notably the largest titanosaurs from South America, than they are today. Doesn't that compromise the whole idea of uniform increase in size, that is to say, increase in power? And I would argue the answer to that is no. Not only is it the case that in our interpretation, at least, dinosaurs were what we call gigantotherms or inertial homeotherms. They maintained a high body temperature by their sheer size. Whereas the largest elephants that have ever lived, which according to the estimates that I have found in the Pleistocene of India, might have weighed as much as 22 tons, which is at least 1/3 of that of the dinosaurs. They are endotherms. They produce their own body heat, and therefore they have to eat 5 to 10 times as much per capita as a dinosaur would, even of the 3 times their size. There's another issue, which is also very interesting. The predators of the Mesozoic were also bigger. We didn't talk about herbivores here, but now we're talking about predators. They were bigger too. Think the classic Tyrannosaurus rex. But there were others as well. Bigger than any carnivorous mammal. Well, there's a very interesting possibility that instead of doing it alone, that the most powerful modern predators are social predators. They hunt together. They do it by numbers. And they can take down some pretty large animals. So in other words, whereas the dinosaurs, yes, they may have aggregated, but as far as we know at this point at least, they were not as social, not as involved in group hunting as, say, wolves, other dogs, and a few other mammals are. So numbers have, in part at least, substituted for sheer size. So has a higher metabolic rate. In the oceans, the largest animal living today is the blue whale. The largest predator of today in the oceans is not as big as the fossil megatoothed shark, Otodus megalodon. But the animal that has replaced the Otodus, the megatoothed shark, is the killer whale. So you might ask, how did they orchestrate that? They're social. They get together and hunt even the largest whales. So social hunting has even come, albeit very late, to the oceans. And then, of course, we should turn to the human case. Are we really an exception to the patterns that I've described? Many people, I think particularly in the past, have put humans on a pedestal to the point where, for example, economists might say, well, anything you have to say about ecology or the way organisms interact with one another has no relevance whatsoever to what we do as humans. After all, organisms don't have banks or stock markets or any number of, or money for that matter, although I will argue that money is a means of exchange just as energy is for other forms of life. But are we therefore so different from every other life form that we shouldn't even bother with the history of life. And I would argue, yes, humans are unique in important ways. We are, of course, social, but more importantly, we exert, both individually and collectively, a vast amount of power, far more power than any organism has before our time. And ever since the Anthropocene began, around the year 1950, at least as far as current views go, and I have reluctantly come to that view myself, although I might have put the Anthropocene back to the beginning of agriculture, but never mind. The Anthropocene has seen from 1950 to the current day something like an 800-fold increase in the per capita and collective power that we use. That is simply staggering. And yet, what we have done as humans in a few centuries or a few millennia is exactly what life has been doing all along for 3.5 or more billion years. That is to say, there's an advantage, an immediate advantage, to be as powerful as possible. Humans have developed technology outside of our bodies. We have used sources of energy that no organism has done before us. And therefore, our pursuit of power is simply a continuation with enormous acceleration of the process, the relentless selection for greater agency that has gone on pretty much throughout the history of life, from the beginning of cells, when there were no trees or birds or flowers or singing crickets. But it's all the same process playing out on a vastly greater, or a vastly shorter time scale and a vastly greater spatial scale. We have, over the centuries, eliminated nearly all reasonable constraints. Oh yes, we have a pandemic here or there, but if you think about how small those losses have become, there are famines, and of course we worry about places like Yemen and Tigray and many other places in the world where there just isn't enough food. But if you look at humanity as a whole, we have largely eliminated famine. Still do lots of war, although with fewer casualties than there used to be. We still do all kinds of destruction, no question about that. And in fact, that's going to be my next point. Because we have overpowered almost the rest of terrestrial and aquatic life, humans have established for the first time in the history of life a single species monopoly. Now, economists, they're humans too, maybe, have worried about monopolies because it kind of distorts the market. The prices are too high and there's not enough competition, and so they decry monopoly for that reason, and it's a good reason, no question about it. Monopolies are economically bad idea. But they're also bad for another important reason. There is nothing else that can correct your mistakes. Other organisms simply do not have the power to correct the obvious overexploitation of the world's natural resources. We have been, according to recent analyses, we have been unsustainable since at least 1980. And it's not slowing down, regardless of all the rhetoric. So we have created an economic monopoly, and that also does mean that somehow, somewhere, we have to find a mechanism for reducing or at least capping our own power. I am afraid I am a bit of a pessimist on this score. It may be true that because of declining birth rates, we are slowly but surely slowing the rate of increase, but it's still an increase in population size. Perhaps more importantly, because we all wish for people's standards of living to rise, particularly in the global south and many other places that are in the global north as well. But that means that per capita consumption is also rising. And the two together, per capita consumption and population size, are increasing even as we are becoming increasingly unsustainable. I think there are important things we can do. I'm all with Thomas Piketty, for example, the extremely verbose economist, whose books, two of whose 1,000-page books I've read. I should get a prize for that. I'm all with him that we must find a way to minimize economic inequality. And there are good ways of doing it, fairer tax systems and so forth. And this is not something I want to talk about in great detail. But it is really important for politicians, for us professors, to come up with solutions. One question that I wish economists would ask more than they have is this: can we construct a human economy that, like many ecosystems in the geological past, are more or less stable without that economy looking like a recession or a depression? Is there a way to do it? I don't know the answer to that, and it's probably not going to be a panacea, but at least we should start to ask the question. We have become, as many people have recognized, including some economists at least, on all sides of the political spectrum, that we've become addicted to perpetual growth. And there's no doubt that human welfare has increased vastly over the last several centuries. I am quite happy to be living now as compared, say, to the 17th century. Not least, by the way, because in those days, no blind person would ever have been educated as well as I have been. So that's the human predicament. But I want to sort of say one other thing that goes back to the whole history of life. As Kevin Boyce, whom I consider as one of the real lights in modern paleontology, and in particular in paleobotany, has pointed out, the Earth has to be in some degree of balance. Outputs and inputs have to balance on very long geological timescales. How does that comport with an increase in power of living things over geological time? After all, we have seen increasing productivity by plants, particularly in the last 100 million years, thanks to a wonderful invention by some flowering plants where the veins in their leaves have become denser. That means that the veins are closer to the sites of photosynthesis, and that has enabled the photosynthetic capacity of individuals and of communities to increase. Similar things have happened in the ocean, though to a lesser extent. The systems of the Paleozoic, when plants first got onto land, they were quite inefficient in the sense that they left behind vast amounts of coal, which we, of course, now are using as a resource for the first time in the history of life. That meant that plants were throwing away an incredible amount of carbon, and it remained out of reach for living things for something on the order of 300 million years. That came to an end with us, of course. What I think is going on here is a simple conclusion, which I have to tell you I hadn't thought of until this morning, because as every day I read papers, thanks today at least to Tracy Thompson. We read a paper by Kevin Boyce and his colleagues about this whole problem of balancing outputs and inputs. And it occurred to me that what has happened is that the part of the Earth system that is alive has expanded itself. That is to say, you could almost say that the biosphere has become more alive than it used to be. It has become more efficient in recycling nutrients. It has become more powerful altogether on a global scale as well as on smaller scales. And it has exploited resources over time that previously were less exploited. For example, nitrogen, inert nitrogen in the atmosphere was not really well used by organisms until nitrogen fixers came along, which is a largely Mesozoic and Cenozoic phenomenon. So in other words, the part that we now consider to be the biosphere contains a lot of inert elements, but more of those elements have become parts of bodies of organisms. Humans, because of our overexploitation, are upsetting this cart and creating a disruption as severe, although very different in quality, as the mass extinctions of the past, which, to my understanding at least, are mostly caused by phenomena such as asteroid impacts over which life had no control whatsoever. The big difference is that we do have control over things, and therefore it is our responsibility to prevent, or at least to mitigate as much as possible, the overexploitation that goes on. We can't continue to go as things are. So the perspective that I want to leave you with is this. Yes, history is one damn thing after another. And that series of particulars is of real interest. Most of us, including myself, spend a lot of effort trying to understand those details, the comings and goings of evolutionary branches or clades, the relationship between geological events like extinctions and volcanoes and large igneous provinces and so on, were very important, and how life has responded to them and perhaps modified them. We all care, at least I care, about taxonomic problems, the classification, the evolutionary trajectory of individual branches, and in the human case, the comings and goings of nations or statesmen and stateswomen. And all these details are very, very important. But beyond those details, I think there do lurk important generalities and processes that are powered by phenomena that have been as old as the history of life, agency and natural selection. Not just natural selection, but agency as well. I have to say that I could never have imagined a career which is continuing as satisfying as the one I have had and the one that I continue to have. Starting with a sense of beauty and a sense of questioning the natural world. I have been fortunate to be able to work in the sciences, where I have been able to ask, and I hope, to answer some really deep and fundamental questions, and to discover some interesting phenomena. I would so hope that other people who aspire to work in the sciences or to work in academic fields will have a similar experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we are going to continue the program now with some videos, and there is going to be another presentation here in real time. So let's continue now, share a series of videos now.
Distinguished Professor Chih-Ling Tsai, Graduate School of Management.
So, but I truly appreciate all my students for many years' support and their effort. And I'm a lucky person. And because teaching is my dream, since I was the kid, I want to be a teacher. And because I always struggle about the learning. And so when I was a kid, I said, I want to be a teacher. So when I teach my students, basically I switch position. Now, so I ask myself, what's the motivation to be a teacher? And how do you deliver your lectures in a high standard? And how do you, what's the first priority you want to set up for your students? So to try to address those issues, so first I always try to lay out that my first goal is not teaching, deliver any knowledge. So my first goal is how to show my students how to be a good human being, how to be a good, for instance, manager in the business school. So that is the most important for the young generation. Otherwise, we just look up, always get the money, get the title, everything. And so that is very significant for me in this generation, how to share all the expert knowledge to the student and hope they can be a good leader with their heart. So in order to do that, I always have to show my, my part, so that I really consider each of my students. So I have to interview all my students. So I have to memorize all their names before the class starts. So I basically have to touch with my students even before I interview them one by one, because from their picture, I can imagine what they expect from me, and no matter what their background and so on and so forth. So the day one, I always tell my students, so that in my lecture, I ask them, why do you come to the UC Davis? Walter asked me the question. So my best memory basically is from my students and also from my dean, the early dean, Bob Smiley. So I met him 2 weeks ago. So the day one, when Bob Smiley interviewed me, so asked me what you can do for the GSM. So I talked to the Dean Bob Smiley. I said, I can tell you many things. I can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But I only tell you, I give my best shot till I retire. But you don't know me, so you don't know what's called my best shot. So 2 weeks ago, I visited his house, said, Bob Smiley, I retired. I kept my promise, 32 years, I finished my job. So this is one memory. And he also remembered, because he said, we always meet during the Christmas, because I work all the time, including Christmas, New Year. So one day, 1 year, he called me at home. He said, Chih-Ling, where are you? You're supposed to be in the office to work. So actually he teased me because that day, the Christmas Eve, I have some of the parties, so I didn't go to the school around the 10 o'clock. So the next year, he was not there. I almost called him, I said, but I didn't call him. So I just gave a simple example to show how great Bob Smiley, GSM, or UC Davis, gave me so much. I truly appreciate it. I'm really thankful for everything. Thank you very much. Okay.
Hello, my name is Arie Vermeij. I am Geerat's brother, and I live in the Netherlands. When Geerat was 9 years old and I was 10, we moved to the United States, and there we were very close. We shared our daily lives by looking at nature and moving around. And after a while, you know, it was time for me to live my own life, and I moved back to the Netherlands. And all this time we have stayed in very close contact. We both speak Dutch to each other, but when necessary, we can also move into English. So that makes it really interesting for us. We have different interests in life, but we also share the same enthusiasm for nature. And when we walk together, which we still do on occasion when we happen to meet, we share flowers and we share sounds of birds with each other. And Geerat is very eager to show me his shell collection in the university. And we've seen that a number of times, a really beautiful collection. We certainly always enjoy talking to each other. And also my wife and Edith, Geerat's wife, of course, enjoy the same thing when we do so. We are on very good terms with one another, and we are happy about that because that is the most important thing that we have, the love for one another. Not only that, but I am also very, very proud of him. And very proud that he has become a distinguished professor at the University of California. Very happy for him because his American dream has come true. And now, of course, I am also like him. I'm not working anymore, not actively working. Of course, Geerat is still doing a lot of scientific work, but not as a professor now, but just as an emeritus professor. And I hope he will enjoy that time also. Thank you very much.
So I'm Dr. Robin Hansen. I am Professor Emeritus from the Department of Pediatrics, and I am very excited to interview for this group of interviews of emeritus professors, my former department chair, Dr. Anthony Phillips. He was my department chair for many, many years. And so I'm really interested in his reflections now that he's retired and is emeritus professor. So Tony, let me start by asking you what actually brought you to UC Davis in the chair position.
Well, I was at another institution at that point in time. It was 1998, I think, and I was appointed acting chair, which was something that frightened the heck out of me. It was not my nightmares when I thought I'd want to do that, but I grew into the position, or so I thought, and actually was beginning to enjoy it. Then this position came up at a point in time where I was interested in moving. I knew several people here already, particularly in the Department of Nutrition. I knew a few of the faculty members as well. And so when the position came up, I was really excited about the possibility of joining the faculty. And as things came along, they worked out very well. The university was part of the University of California, so a large, multifaceted institution. There was a children's hospital. The Department of Pediatrics was already quite active and had a lot of room for expansion, as did the Children's Hospital, which also was here at that point in time. And so I thought it was really attractive. The community was also really interested. And then I got to meet some of the faculty, you included. I was really very encouraged by all of that. I even met one of the pulmonologists who became also a close friend, Jesse Jode, who was interested in starting a pediatric string quartet. So for many different reasons, I thought this was a really good place for me if I got accepted for the position, and as it turned out, it did.
Yeah. So now that you've been retired for a few years, what are some of the things that you reflect on the most about your tenure at UC Davis?
Well, I think some of the things that came to pass included the development of the Mind Institute, which you talked about in your interview. That was just beginning, as you
Yes.
remember, and so
Yeah.
we were all really active participants in the development of it, which was really a lot of fun. Other things that were happening at that time were fundraising for parts of the Children's Hospital. When I took my initial tour here, and I guess it was 1998, it was a hard hat tour of the Davis Tower, which hadn't opened yet. And pediatrics was going to be actually the first floor in there, ultimately followed by our newborn intensive care unit and then the pediatric intensive care unit. So I saw, as did a number of other people, that there were opportunities to actually be involved in the development of new portions of the building that were really going to be important for children's health. So I'd say those are a couple of the things that were really very interesting. And collaborations with people on main campus in the Department of Nutrition, that was another thing that was really quite useful and actually pretty striking. It was a very good Department of Nutrition.
So on reflection, what words of advice would you give to the current pediatric department chair or just department chairs in general?
Sure. I just wanted to reflect on one thing that I hadn't really mentioned, and that was from the moment that I got here, I felt very supported by not only the faculty, but by the deans, the associate deans, and other department chairs, some of whom we've all retired now, but are still very good friends of mine. And that was extremely important to be able to have that kind of collegiality, which I must say I didn't have at my previous institution. So I'm sorry, what was the last thing you were going to
What words of advice would you give to department chairs and maybe our current department chair?
I don't think that he needs very much advice,
No.
although we have talked in the past. As a fellow neonatologist, I think he also shares the same interests that I do in newborn medicine and physiology. But I think if I had to say that to any other chairs who are coming in, whether it's in Department of Pediatrics or other departments, I would say, first of all, listen to your faculty. Feel like you understand what they're going through, because as I went through as a very junior faculty, I know what the stresses can be, both for those who are doing predominantly clinical work and those who are in tenure track areas where they have to produce not only teaching but significant research. Those are difficult jobs, and it's also difficult to maintain. We call it life balance, but it's really important to maintain that outside of the area of medicine that you're in. So I would say listen to your faculty, listen to your colleagues, listen to your spouse if you have one, and other significant others are really important to helping you achieve your goals.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. It was wonderful to listen to your reflections, and I look forward to many years of friendship.
Thank you very much for the interview. It was really a wonderful experience. Thanks a lot.
So my name is Robert Dudley. I'm a professor of integrated biology at UC Berkeley, and I simply want to say to Gary, congratulations. It's been an amazing ride in science, and I've known you and Edie for about 50 years, since my late mother Bettina became your reader at the University of Maryland, a task in which she continued for 17 years. So I grew up knowing Gary and just being in awe at his masterful knowledge of so many diverse fields, not least of which is the English language, which he would best many native speakers on a regular basis and punish us horribly from on moment-to-moment basis. The science has been amazing, and it's all motivated by love of the organism in natural environments. And I think, Gary, you have inspired so many people to work on mollusks and insects and plant leaves, and to think about macroevolutionary trends and microscopic interactions and texture of surfaces in the biosphere, and just so many things. And you're not stopping, you're accelerating. It's embarrassing. It's so humbling. We were just over with the family to say hello a couple weeks ago, and you've got another book coming out. How do you do it? You know, you said it only took you 6 months. Well, it takes most of us 6 years, 6 decades. But you know, you're going to get even more done in retirement. It's just embarrassing. So again, heartfelt congratulations. We look forward to many more years of productive scientific interaction.
We continue with the local program. This lecture series is a new event at UC Davis. Being a new event, we have that advantage that we can be creative and have a different format. I woke up one of these days in the middle of the night and I said, why don't we have a poem for the new Emeriti? I cannot write one, but I know people here on the faculty can do that. They can do that very well. So I invited Andy Jones. And surely enough, he wants to participate. And here is, dear colleagues and friends, please join me. Welcome to the podium, Davis Poet Laureate, Emeritus, and the very active member of our UC Davis faculty, Dr. Andy Jones. Andy.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you for this opportunity. It's a real pleasure to bring poetry to such an important event. I was challenged to think, you know, what do I know about shells that I could work into a poem? And what if Ralph Hexter, our Provost Emeritus, shows up? Should I put some Greek myth in there as well? So this is what I came up with. It's called Daedalus. Daedalus. Contemporary of Hercules, perhaps Daedalus was our first retired distinguished professor. After the inventor's workshop in Athens, after the exile from Greece and the palace of Minos, after the puzzle of the labyrinth, after the open-air cell he and his son shared with the birds at the top of the tower at Knossos, Daedalus was given time to reflect on his creations. Clearly, none was more ingenious. He had invented carpentry and its tools, each of them a metaphor. When Daedalus conceived the axe, he reminded all of us to sharpen our tools. With the plumb line, he taught us to measure at right angles twice before we start to build. With the drill, he taught us to excavate. With glue, he taught us to make connections, to fashion with wood, with fabrics, and even with feathers. After his flight from Crete, Daedalus hoped to lie low in Sicily and to give thanks to the gods for his rest. But King Minos lured him out with the puzzle of the conch shell, challenging any man to thread it from one end to the other. Minos knew that only Daedalus could decode the conchological dilemma, and that by solving the puzzle, the genius would reveal himself. If you know this story, you know that the venerable inventor tied a thread to an ant and introduced the eusocial insect to the entrance of the conch. Round and round the inside of the shell it marched, lured by the smell of Sicilian honey on the other side. When King Minos was presented with the threaded shell, he knew his former court genius was on the island. Today, we celebrate our Daedaluses. Taxonomically, let's call them geniuses, whose discoveries and creations are known throughout the land. Scholars whose accomplishments approach the status of myth. The laurels are yours and well deserved. But you might also think of yourselves as that industrious ant. For long have you marched through your personal labyrinths, hearing the published echoes of your own voices in the shell, as well as those of the people outside the lab who have cheered you on. Now is the time to liberate yourself from your tiny harnesses. Come out of your shell. Cap your power. You answer now to no king, to no court, to no fellow virtuosi. It's time to enjoy all the honey that rewards you for your persistent genius. You have threaded the conch, and long will we speak of your triumphs. Thank you.
We continue with the last segment of a short video here.
Hi, I'm Michael Lairmore, the former dean of the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis and a recent emeriti. And like the other emeriti, I know the transitions have been different for many of you. For me, it's been a great transition from a great job. I was able to be dean of this school since 2011 and retired in 2021 from the dean position and then retired from the university in early 2022. I've been consulting quite a bit and finding that it's kind of like that movie Taken. I have a particular set of skills that are very useful for people, and I have a lot of colleagues, as it turns out, throughout the country from my days as dean of the school, including two of my former department chairs, which are deans at other colleges of veterinary medicine, Dory Borgensen at Washington State and Birgit Pushner at Michigan State. So I'm very proud of them and all of the people I interact with at UC Davis. It is a very special time at the School of Veterinary Medicine because they are getting ready to celebrate their 75th anniversary from the forming of the school. So I was able to follow many outstanding, incredible people before me, like Dean Benny Osborne, Bill Pritchard, Ed Rohde, Fred Murphy. And they set up a legacy, and all of the faculty, staff, and students were so incredible, and that work continues. They've had many successes in both the research side as well as clinical side, despite COVID and despite disruptions that have continued. And it gives me great pleasure and gratitude to see the continued success of the school. I think one of the things that I'm very proud of is the type of things that we responded to, and we set out to have a mission which addressed societal needs. In 2011 and 12, we had a new strategic plan, and following that, we really set out a path to advance the health of animals, people, and the environment, the One Health approach, but also look at the ways in which our school impacted societal needs. And throughout that decade, there are many programs that responded to that. For example, for the students, a lot more support. Mental health support, to support for student loans. Our endowment grew, and that has continued to grow and has been a focus of the school to give scholarships to the students to reduce their student debt load. And I think that is one of those things that grew over the last decade and has continued to grow under the leadership of Dean Stetter. And so I'm really proud of that legacy that has continued and was established through the development folks there, Kelly Nimps, Tom Venturino, and others that have continued that legacy. One of the things I'm excited about also is to note the continued success of the faculty. Pam Line is a good example recently, who is a department chair, and I was very gratified to see her get invested as a member of the AAAS, and also is going to win and going to be receiving the AAVMC, the Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Research Award, a national award, the only one selected, in March. And at that meeting in March in Washington, she'll be joined by John Pascoe. And John is going to be recognized for his many outstanding contributions with a special award from AAVMC. I miss my colleagues, my former deans and deans that are still there, like Mark Winey, for example, who I helped recruit. And one of the things I'm very proud of is I was on a number of dean searches, and many of the people that we helped recruit to UC Davis are still there and doing great things. And I miss people like Ralph Hexter, who was my provost for most of my time, and also Emery Krogan as well, the new provost. And I would like to finish maybe by saying to all of the Emeriti, I hope that you're enjoying life as much as Donna and I in your retirement, and enjoying having the time to, as Brad Smith, one of my retired faculty, used to say, to get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, read the New York Times, and plan your day. And I think that's the definition of a successful retirement. And to be continuing to be interacting with colleagues such as Walter Leal, and I appreciate the opportunity and the amazing work that he's doing to connect the Emeriti. So with that, I'll sign off and look forward to other connections back to UC Davis, and wishing success for all of you.
Hi, I'm Alan Jackman, and I'm the chair of the UCD Emeriti Association's Video Records Committee. On behalf of the Emeriti Association, I want to welcome you all and encourage you to join the Emeriti Association. But in particular, I want to encourage you to sign up to do what we call an Emeriti video. In 1992, the Emeriti Association created a program to record campus history through the recollections of retired faculty. And there are now over 500 of these recordings that have been posted all over to Aggie Video. The interviews are very informal, just a conversation between the interviewee and the interviewer, who is usually a friend or colleague of the interviewee. Very little preparation is needed. They usually cover everything, starting with childhood and continuing to the day of the interview, and even going over what you do in retirement. If you're interested, and I hope you are, please contact me. I'm Alan Jackman, and you can get me by email at apjackman@UC Davis. That's apjackman@UC Davis. Or you can call the Retiree Center and ask them to get in touch with me. I hope you decide to participate in this and have a great retirement.
Hello, my name is Pam Ronald. I'm in the Department of Plant Pathology and the Genome Center, and I am here today with Mark Schwartz. And Mark, you have been at UC Davis for nearly 30 years. What stands out for you?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, it was a great place to be for my career. And I think what stands out for me, or one of the things that stands out for me, that UC Davis really took a chance on us, and that Sharon, my wife, Strauss, who will be giving the spring lecture, was hired in the Department of Evolution and Ecology in 1994. And forward-looking administration created a temporary position for me at that point in time. And then 4 years later, that worked into a regular faculty line in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy. And that's where I spent my career. And it's just been great to have two careers, such a strong university in the ecological sciences and in biology, because it's, as you know, good colleagues make for better careers. And I think that I'm one of those people who has really been advantaged by having lots of good colleagues, and being in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy really helped me as a conservation biologist to work from being just purely a conservation biologist into really studying conservation science and thinking about policies and practices for conservation, because we've learned over the years that biology is often not the limiting constraint of knowledge for how we get conservation actions done. There's a lot of social issues that are associated with the conservation practice, and I've really evolved in my career to moving from the biology side of that department more and more over to the social sciences side of that department. So it's been a good place for me.
Well, that's good. I know UC Davis is lucky to have you and Sharon, and certainly my life has been enriched having you both here. And I'm glad you're not moving away, but
Right.
What are you doing now?
Well, continuing on some of the same research themes that I've been working on before I retired, things associated with conservation, in particular associated with climate change and how we adapt ecosystems to climate change for conservation purposes. So I'm a co-director of our campus function for the Climate Adaptation Science Center for the Southwest. I'm continuing to do that for a couple more years. And I'm associated with the Climate Hub from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that's here on campus. And I've been working closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service recently on a decision protocol for how they make decisions on some new kinds of conservation decision-making, things that they haven't really been asked to do before, and now they don't really know how to make decisions about whether they should or shouldn't do it. I'm talking about things like assisted migration. So when climate changes and species are moving to new locations, the Fish and Wildlife Service is asked, should they move a species in order to help protect it? And that's a kind of controversial conservation step, and it gets a lot of people very excited. And so they want to be very careful about how they make those decisions. And so we're helping them design decision guidelines for that.
Boy, that sounds like a lot of work for retirement. Are you having any fun?
Yeah, well, as you know, a few years back, we bought a little place up on the coast that's got a lot of kind of broken down redwood barns, and I get to practice my skills with hand tools on weekends and up there. It's a year-to-year contract with those barns to have them not fall down, but so far so good. They're still standing.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Walter.
Yeah, thank you, Walter, for doing this.
And congratulations to all the other Emeriti.
Hi, I'm Mark Bertness, Emeritus Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Brown University and one of Gary Vermeij's very first graduate students. I'd like to congratulate Gary on his transformative career spanning over a half a century that has highly impacted evolutionary ecology and biogeography. The stunning breadth and creativity of Gary's work has inspired so many careers that it's hard to imagine what marine ecology and evolutionary biology would have been if Gary had not been introduced to seashells from the Wadden Sea by one of his grade school teachers. Like many others, I read Gary's groundbreaking work on the biogeography of global processes and pattern as a student, and it changed my career forever. Gary's work has been immensely impactful and has become deeply ingrained in the zeitgeist of evolutionary ecology and biogeography. When ecology and evolutionary biologists went small and detailed, Gary went large and creative, thinking and writing about global processes and patterns decades before it became a fashionable topic like it is today. I would be remiss in not mentioning a few personal lessons Gary taught me. One was, and there are many examples of this first one, ignore meetings and question authority. The best example I can think of is when I was a graduate student and Gary was a beginning faculty member, he didn't want to go to faculty meetings. So he would bring little friction cars, matchbook cars to faculty meetings, rev them up, and then send them shooting off on the floor so they'd be bump into chairs and the department chairs' feet. And finally, after a couple episodes of this, the department said, "All right, it's fine, Gary, you don't have to attend meetings." The second thing that I'd like to mention that he taught me is play and work are the same thing. And now this is a lesson that's gotten me into a lot of trouble, but with Gary, it's sort of different. If you've ever had the opportunity to walk to school with Gary go on a long walk with him, you know, he is just so into nature, and every time he's going to work, it's like a grade schooler going to the beach for the first time. He just carries with him an enthusiasm for his work that most people lose, you know, ontogenetically when they turn 21 or so. So here's to celebrating Gary's distinguished career and well-deserved retirement. Gary won't retire, of course, but will simply have more time to work and play on his mollusks and ideas that they generate. So good luck to Gary and Edie on their continuing great adventure, and a heartfelt thank you to Gary for leading the way on so many things for so many people. Thank you, Gary.
Mark your calendar. Spring lecture by Distinguished Professor Emerita Sharon Strauss. Monday, April 17th at 3 p.m. Pacific Time.
Please come back on Monday, April 17th at 3 p.m. Pacific Time for the spring lecture by Distinguished Professor Emerita Sharon Strauss.
Give me a second here. And for the closing remarks, I would like to invite to the podium the Dean of the College of Letters and Science, Estella Atekwana, and I'd like also to thank Estella for providing the food and the entertainment and help us to organize this event here financially. I really appreciate her support, and I have been corresponding with her for a long time, but finally I have the pleasure to meet her in person, and she's celebrating 1 year tenure here at UC Davis as the new Dean. Estella, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by congratulating Gary for a distinguished career at UC Davis, for all your accomplishments, and just want to say thank you so much for all your contributions to the Earth and Planetary Science Department, to UC Davis, to science, for the inspiring stories you told from looking at seashells, and for the legacy, rich legacy that you've left behind for many to emulate. Our Emeriti faculty really have a rich experience that should not be allowed to sunset just because they are transitioning to what I call another phase of their lives. And so I really want to say thank you to Walter for this really amazing initiative to keep our Emeriti faculty engaged and active with our UC Davis community. We need them to continue to mentor our faculty and our students, and to keep working on those books that they never finished, those experiments that never finished because they didn't have time, because they were mentoring so many of our students. And it is really for this reason that in the College of Letters and Science, we are launching an Emeriti club. We don't want you to go away. We have a lot of students that still need mentoring, serving on their committees, inspiring the next generation. So we want to keep them engaged. And so if you are an L&S Emeriti faculty and you haven't received that invitation, please let us know so that we can send out the invitation to you. Thank you for all of you who've come out this afternoon to celebrate Gary and all our other Emeriti faculty. There were more than 170 people online. That's amazing. I gave the State of the College address. I couldn't even get 150. This tells you just how much we do appreciate and continue to really hold in high regards our Emeriti faculty. Thank you, and I hope you have a chance to mix and talk and get a chance to shake Gary's hand and have some food to eat. And have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much. like the dean said, enjoy the food and talk to the students. We have a number of students in here that are participating in this event, so take the opportunity and bring this back with you. Don't need to recycle, bring back with you, and make sure that you scan it here later, and maybe you can do an evaluation of the program, or maybe send some notes to Gary or something. All right, so thank you very much.